And Laura, I know you have had an opportunity to hear Dr. George's presentation. Would you, from a technician's clinical perspective, like to offer some feedback too as to how things seem to be going in your world and what we need to do to be better patients who serve you?
You guys have all been
as we get
wonderful.
Our plasma tested.
You guys have all been wonderful patients. It's been wonderful to have this study. We've been running this study here at MD Anderson for a little over a year now. We've taken, I didn't have the actual number this morning because I didn't go to the lab, but we've got well over 400 draws on about 165 patients, and we're moving forward currently with 150 of those for publication. We feel like we have a significant group of exon 9 patients, so we're hopeful that we'll see some results there that haven't been shown before. And we have almost complete mutation testing on all of ours. There's only a few that didn't have any mutation testing done. So that's actually sitting with our statistician currently, and we're presenting some preliminary results of that at a conference coming up in early November, a sarcoma conference. And all of you have been wonderful. As I mentioned, I speak to you guys every week to remind you no Gleevec before the draw, and only in a few cases do people forget and take their Gleevec that morning. But it's been wonderful. We really feel like our studies had a tremendous impact, at least for those who've had significant toxicity. We've adjusted the dose a little bit based on a high plasma level in some patients. That's been a real exciting thing. We're happy to learn, of course, that patients with low plasma levels, if we adjust the dose, we could see an increase in the plasma level. That was one of the initial things that we were looking for. And so we've adjusted doses both up and down to accommodate a change in plasma level or toxicity. It's been a real positive impact of the study, we found.
A question for you, Laura. With this, my last visit to MD Anderson, one of my colleagues had increased toxicity, particularly hand and foot problems. After a certain amount of time, do we just accept those side effects and move on and try to deal with them, or will the dosages be adjusted accordingly?
Well, we've only adjusted those doses in some particular cases where the patient had a very, very high plasma level, like 4,000, I think was one level. And so that was well above the 1,100 minimum that we were looking for. And in that patient, we were able to lower her dose some and try to improve a little bit of quality of life and reduce that toxicity some. It's not really common that we would go down in dose. And so that's something that you'd have to work out between Dr. Trent and Pat and everything. And usually we're going the other direction. We're raising doses to increase plasma levels.
Mm-hmm. I just think right now we're still also trying to understand prospectively the value of that. Most of the decisions that we are doing in our center really have to do with how the patient's feeling, what their scans are doing, and where they're at sort of in their disease process. And I think the issue of integrating plasma levels and dose adjustment is still an area that is under sort of investigation.
Mm-hmm. At what point after you start, I'm on adjuvant Gleevec, and at the beginning, I'm on adjuvant Gleevec, and at the beginning, my levels, I think the first one they ever took was maybe 550, and then the next time it was 9-something. And I'd already been on it for about a year, and the next time it was 11-something, and the next time it was 1540, and last time it was 1900. Does it just keep climbing, or is that a flag that something's not
right or something to miss? So I think that the bulk of the data that we have, we'll have more from John Trent's study here, from your study, you guys' study here, but the bulk of the data that we have is really single time point. And so following patients over time is something that this study, which is different than the study that I was talking about, but this study that's being done here at MD Anderson is going to help us to understand. And what that means in terms of impact on disease control, we have no idea, none. We're just really doing those time points to say, gee, what happens to people over time? And then at some point we'll be able to look at disease control, but right now we don't know.
You don't know where a flag would be
No. What a flag would be is if you started to feel bad, independent of what your levels were. If your level was 600 and you were having terrible toxicity, then that's something that needs to be addressed independent of what your level is. It's your side effect, it's what needs to be addressed. If someone happened to check a level on you and it was 4,000, but you were feeling totally fine and your disease was under great control, then that's totally fine. Because what matters is what's happening to you, how your disease is, how you feel. What the blood level test has to do with anything related to that, we don't know yet.
Something that we were interested to see that had been reported in the literature was that some patients that are on imatinib experience actually a decrease over time, over 1 year, as much as 30 to 40%. And we didn't see that in our patients. If anything, we saw them very steady over that year. And so yours increasing over time is something separate, is a little bit unique. Most of our patients at the same dose over that year had relatively similar plasma levels during that time.
For either or both of you, as far as the dosages, is there concern that if you meet the 1,100 or 1,500 with 400 milligrams, that if you increase your dosage to 600 or from 6 to 800, that you preclude yourself from future escalation in your dosage amount in the event that you might have a recurrence? Should we save those milligrams? Should we store them up and bank them for future, perhaps?
So I'll tell you, my opinion outside of the context of a clinical trial, I would not dose adjust based on a level alone. I would only dose adjust if there was a clinical reason to dose adjust. So I would dose escalate if I was concerned for progression. I would dose reduce if I was concerned for toxicity, and I wouldn't use the level to guide those decisions. I think they're based on our current available data. I think those are decisions that should be made based on what's in the clinical best interest of the patient for what we know at this time. So I agree with you. I wouldn't dose escalate. If you just had a number and you were on 400 and you were, an exon 11, we'll just take the exon 9s out because it's a little bit more controversial about their dose. But if you're an exon 11 and you're doing fine at 400 and your dose was, and your level was 900, I wouldn't do a thing. If you started to grow later, then we needed to think about dose escalation, then maybe I would. I just think there's too much interpatient variability, and even in those scatter plots, I mean, there's the degree of variability. There are patients that are below the line that still do fine, and so we have to figure out what that is about those patients, and we have to figure out prospectively. I think we have to look prospectively. If you do dose adjust people just on the level, then does it make a difference? But I think doing that in the context of a clinical trial is really important because then we have the data, then we can guide in the future so that in the future we'll know, should you be dose adjusting? Then if you should, then we should. Or shouldn't you be dose adjusting? Because if you shouldn't be, then we can decrease all the concern around blood level testing and all the blood tests and all the procedures. I mean, that's one thing that John Trent and I were just talking about is whether the study's positive or negative, meaning whether we find that prospective dose adjustment helps or doesn't help. We'll have more information, and then we can really, I think, make the best recommendations for people. So sorry, that was a long answer.
It's very good.
Maybe I missed it, but why are we looking at the C-min as opposed to the C-max or the area under the curve? Why is that becoming more important? I know other disease states, other therapeutics look at the other two areas more importantly than the trough.
So in imatinib, in the phase 1 and phase 2, early phase 1, phase 2, there was very good correlation between C-min, C-max, and AUC. And C-min's just the easiest to test. So because they all seem to correlate very well, you could pick any one, but C-min is the most practical, so that's what sort of moved forward.
So if you did C-min, they came in at the trough, and then after you measure that, could they take their dose, and then you can get at least a peak or a max an hour later, and start seeing if there's a comparison between how high they go, because, I mean, it could be how fast the body metabolizes the drug, right?
It could be, but the hope is, the plasma, any blood level testing should be performed after a minimum of 7 to 14 days of dosing. So at that point, you're really at steady state. And so
7 to 14
days of continuous dosing. Okay. So if you start on imatinib or you have a change in dose and you want to see what your level is, so in the study, for example, we have all of the level testing after minimum of 7 days of no missed doses, because at that point you really should be at steady state. And we think whether you check C